The required minimum wage. On the other hand, when we talk about institutional causal factors, these are things, of course, that are done by a collective. This refers to government decision and policy making. For instance, tariffs can be prohibitive and can cause harm and danger to the well-being of people. We can also look into how the distribution of resources is being affected in a locality, and somehow the individual has no power nor access to anything that can change the situation, because reforms can only come on the basis of legal measures, or for instance political reforms through elections, and as such these are labeled by Dr. Poge as institutional causal factors. I think I have PowerPoint. I'd like to share it. Methodology. This is the list that I am capable of, and well, because our training in philosophy is more on developing insights, developing arguments. So, pardon me for my inadequacy. But what we did here is we have done focus group discussions in 3 places: Zamboanga City, Cotabato City, and Lake Cebu. We invited students, academics, NGO workers, officials of the BARM. We also invited peace advocates, priests, nuns, and those who live in the Tawi-Tawi, Sulu, and Basilan to be able to discuss, deepen insights. We asked them questions as regard to the situation of the people vis-a-vis their economic lives, the political situation, and interestingly, we have seen some emerging themes, and some of the concepts that I am sharing here came from these FGDs. Okay. Secondary data, of course, came from these materials, articles, books that have been written by scholars, including the 2 main philosophers that we have. And we did some interpretive analysis in order to come up with this paper. Now, so let me ask the question. So why is the Bangsamoro poor? Okay. So we must understand that the Bangsamoro, of course, is a communal society. Its population is something like 4 million. And from the perspective of most who haven't lived there, they view the Bangsamoro as a place of conflict and war. So, but Patricio Binalis, okay, so our esteemed political scientist and historian, has corrected this perception. He says that it is an orthodoxy. It is a bias, a prejudice against the Bangsamoro to see it as a land of conflict. A Japanese scholar, for instance, Suna Yoshisawa, has mentioned that Christians and Muslims have intermarried and have lived peacefully together within the region. And so therefore, to construe the Bangsamoro as a place of war and conflict is somewhat a bias against the people in the region. Okay. So what then is the reason as to why there is poverty in the Bangsamoro? We would like to say that the reason of poverty in the Bangsamoro is not actually these intermittent conflicts, but rather it's about the power dynamics in the region, which I will explain. Such power dynamics has gave rise to what is called by Francisco Lara Jr. as an underground or a shadow economy. Now, what is this shadow economy about? So, to be able to understand this underground or shadow economy, we have to consider the types of structures that are there. Okay, so, the problem in the Bangsamoro is a result of the politics of exclusion. And by this, we mean we have to go back to Philippine history, as I mentioned, in terms of background. The the colonial government, Spain, America, including the Commonwealth government, did not really consider Mindanao as part of the country. So they excluded the island region. And one of the reasons, of course, was there was resistance from the Moros against Spanish rule. And the Americans, when they took over, they enforced what we call the politics of assimilation. They wanted to be friendly with the Muslims, but the main purpose of that is not really to be able to share whatever progress that is to be achieved in the country, but rather it is rather to exploit its mineral resources, particularly according to Brother Carl Gaspar, timber and those you find in the mines. Okay, and when the President Quezon took over, okay, so from the American administration to the Commonwealth government. Mindanao, of course, is popularly known as Land of Promise. Quezon only saw Mindanao as a land resource, which means that the place was to be resettled by migrants coming from Luzon. And this instantaneously marginalized, okay, so the Lumad population and the Moro population in the area, because Mindanao was simply transformed into a land resource that was resettled. So this situation caused so much resentment on the part of our Muslim brothers and sisters. And this culminated, of course, in the Jabida massacre. And as a result of that, the resentment has ignited. Okay, so the type of conflict that we have since witnessed, and of course, this resulted into the formation of the MNLF and then the MILF and the subsequent wars that these two groups against the Philippine government in view of their desire for self-determination. There are, of course, peace agreements that have been signed, and the latest of which was a peace agreement between the national government and the MILF, which resulted to the formation of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, or BARM. Okay. Now, one of the problems when it comes to politics in the Philippines, of course, is this patronage system. So, what is this patronage system? um, Renato Constantino and Ray Eleto describes the patronage system as the relationship between boss and client. The politician, of course, is expected to provide the provisions to give to the constituencies what they need, personal or otherwise, and as a result, the constituents will profess allegiance and loyalty to their bosses, which implies that it perpetuates the position and the power of those who are already entrenched in the political system, and it does not in any way give new opportunities for those who are more competent, and to those people who have the perhaps vision to help others achieve equal and realistic growth prospects. So this patronage system, in that regard, has been the way upon which Philippine society has been into, and this also is a reality in the Muslim Mindanao region. Because of this patronage system, there is, in that sense, a lack of voice and representation on the part of the people when it comes to policy, and even when it comes to how wealth and resources are to be redistributed. During the time of Ferdinand Marcos, so he saw to it that the local elites in the Bangsamoro are beholden to him. And as a result, it perpetuated the poverty in the region, because government projects and programs did not really trickle down into the people, but these have been the sources of corruption by many of those who have been entrenched into their position of power. Okay? So this gives us an idea as regard to why the nature of the economy in the Bangsamoro is predatory. Okay, so it's predatory. By that we mean the economic system preys on the people. It's because political families and clans control the politics, and because they control the politics, they control the business, and because they control the business, they, in that sense, control the economy. Okay, so and this too is a result from the isolation of the region from the economic centers in the country. And because the region is isolated from the economic centers in the country, this creates a certain type of dependency on the part of the people when it on powerful clans to whom they rely on whenever they have problems and troubles. And as a result, this kind of develop a certain type of patronage system wherein since institutions are not working, they will have to depend on these politicians who, as a result, have become their bosses. Okay, so John Seidel calls this predatory system bossism. There's the boss, there's the constituent. The constituent has to be loyal to the boss because the survival of the constituent depends on the boss. This boss refers to the political clan or family. Now we have to look at it from a more comprehensive vantage point or perspective. We must understand that when it comes to the Philippine economy, the national capital region produces 62% of the country's gross domestic product. Okay? Which means that essentially, according to Jonathan Malaya, we have a problem as regard to how wealth is redistributed. And the problem is a problem of power. So the lack of autonomy for the longest time on the part of the Mangsamoro meant that progress and development has not trickled down to the area, and it has caused suffering on the part of the people. And the reason for this is, of course, the centralized nature of governance in the Philippines. Power is concentrated in the capital, and as a result, development is hard to come by in the outlier regions insofar as the concentration of resources is within the capital or its immediate vicinities. Now, another issue that we have discovered, of course, is the level of corruption in the region and generally in the Philippines. Okay, so corruption is problematic because it results to what we call the erosion of public trust. Okay, so according to one peace advocate that I interviewed in Zamboanga City, kind of peace that is being experienced in the Bangsang Moro right now is some sort of superficial. He calls it an artificial peace. It is superficial insofar as those who are in positions of power. They are there, they're doing what they can do, and as such, the reason for that, according to him, is only because there are resources available. But in terms of really empowering the grassroots, empowering the people, and giving them real voices so that they can achieve change in their lives, such is not apparent according to this informant. So the reason there being is that they look at the problem of the Bangsang Moro from the perspective of state centrism. Meaning to say, this kind of approach, you look at the state and how it can redistribute power. So meaning to say, the possibility of empowering people depends on the types of policies that the state will enforce. So, but these policies are, however, dependent on the power struggles within the political hierarchy. And as a result of that, people really cannot have a say in terms of the right policies because these policies will have to depend on the political interests, the business agenda, and of course, the economic interests of those who have been entrenched in power. And so, as a result, we can say that powers that be are the ones that control the economy, the government, and as a result, the people in the Bangsang Moro. Okay? And well, generally, we can look at it and interpret it as some kind of an institutional and democratic deficit. Okay, so in the past, during the administration of the ARMM by Governor Nur Miswari, they have been accused of incompetence and complacency, and as a result of that, there was corruption, and I suppose that is also a kind of bias against our Muslim brothers and sisters. But I believe that the problem really is that of institutional and democratic deficits, the lack of transparency, and it's important in this sense to be able to empower those in the grassroots so that they can have, as I will show later on, real political parties that will cater to their needs and that sense advocate for real and authentic and lasting change, ultimately to achieve and realize a permanent and lasting peace in the region. Okay? So one of the problems that the Bangsamoro is currently facing right now, and as you must have browsed through the news, is there's so much violence in the region in the forthcoming elections. Okay, so the reason for this is the powers that local elites possess and try to muscle their way in so that they gain control politically. Of course, ultimately, when we look at the Philippine society, we look at political elitism, and that political elitism marginalizes, the outlier regions. It marginalizes Mindanao. It, puts into power those who belong to the oligarchy, and this type of elitism puts certain individuals, institutions, and advocacies into some form of a moral high chair, so that as a result of that, they render as meaningless and irrelevant things that those in the margins and outlier regions want to convey. Yet, such is a result in the kind of elitism that you find in the Philippine democracy. This kind of elitism on a national level is also present and apparent in the Bangsang Moro. So in the Bangsang Moro, you see, for instance, a big mansion, and beside that mansion, in the peripheries, you see shanties. Okay, so and these are manifestation as regard to the type of imbalance in terms of power and economic wealth. So this wealth gap in that regard is a result of the dominance, okay, so and the control of those who are entrenched in their political positions, and as a result, it has resulted to the exclusion of minorities, including indigenous peoples. Okay. So, what are the possible solutions? Some scholars have already studied this, notably Julio Tihanki of DLSU, and they would like to promote, or advocate for what we call grassroots political party building. What are political parties? Political parties are the essence of a democracy. In a democracy that's representative, just like us. Okay, so the only way upon which you might be able to advance the interests of the people is to establish political parties that are based on party principles and not based on personalities or wealth. Kind of political party system that we have in the Philippines is something that's rooted on the immediate agenda and the vested interest of those who are in positions of power. So, meaning to say, if you are in the administration and you want to field someone to run for office, of course, the motive is not to achieve greater democratization or a redistribution of wealth, but rather to perpetuate oneself into the position and gain control. Okay, so uh, of the future. And as a result of that, the choices that you have when it comes to this is such that you have politicians who, while are incompetent and are incapable of really representing the people, in as much as they are not responsible and intelligent enough to be able to pursue a people-centered agenda. The main reason why they feel this prominent and famous personality-based politicians is that they simply want to go on with their positions, and that is detrimental to any democracy because a lot of voices, especially those who are capable, are silenced, and as a result, you do not really have an inclusive type of society. So, in this sense, to be able to advance the interests of any democratic society, you have to build political parties from the ground up, which means that people must possess a sense of ownership, and they are the ones who are to choose the candidates that they want to field, because this candidate, hypothetically and ideally, are the ones who can truly represent their interests, and as such, the pursuit of policies, these policies are things that the types of candidates that people choose. Okay, so because they come from the grassroots, they will truly and authentically represent the people in the margins of society. So, in conclusion, we can say that the actual threat right now, with regard to peace building in the Bangsamoro, is the power play, the power struggle, the power dynamics in the region, political clans in that sense, and powerful business interests in the Bangsamoro are the ones that threaten, okay, so the peace building efforts. as much as if you render powerless, say, for instance, those who fought for and struggled in order to achieve uh, the type of autonomy that our Muslim brothers and sisters so desired. If they are sidestepped and the whole process is hijacked, then you will revert and go back to the previous situations we're in. When people feel oppressed, the struggle goes on, and as a result, rebellion will not come to an end. So, thank you so much.
All right, we've just heard an intriguing presentation from our second speaker about the critical aspect of the region's economic injustice and power dynamics. Thank you, sir. Perhaps the audience have questions with your presentation. Let's open the floor for a 15-minute open forum. Please feel free to type your questions in the chat box or hit the raise hand button.
Hi, Sir Ryan. Maybe I will throw the first question.
Hey, yes, yes, sir.
Uh,
Thank you, sir.
the struggles of Bangsamoro has been there for maybe time immemorial.
Yes, sir.
Regardless of what will happen to the Philippine political situation in the Philippines with the advent of the incoming election, I'm just curious, how could be the Bangsamoro people on their own could make or could make an influence or could influence their the situation in their own region, and on the other hand could also influence the situation in the whole country.
Well, primarily, as I've been reading through some of the notes and listening to those that we have interviewed, they have what is called a shared vision, sir, of a society. And in this shared vision, they primarily value and understand their identity as Moro region. And presumably, um, this is also in view of the need to rectify decades of injustices that they have suffered from. The Black Grant for the Bangsang Moro, for instance, in the 2025 budget, if I'm not mistaken, is around 100 billion pesos. Okay, so that's a lot of revenues and a lot of money. So to be able to really effect real and permanent reforms and change, you will have to consider how this type of resource can really trickle down to the people. And so it's important that they strengthen their institutions. And one of the problems, of course, is that they do not have, in terms of their local contractors. So it's necessary that you will have developed such a system so that you are assured that those who are working in the region really thinking about the progress and reform from the point of view of infrastructure, from the point of view of say the economic development of the region, meaning to say the sentiments of the people. Once you are from the same area, there's greater chance that you will devote and dedicate your time in improving infrastructure than when you are somebody who is from outside, who is simply there to do business. So what I'm trying to say is that they will have to develop their own mechanisms, their own systems, so that you can sustain these types and levels of development because the money is already there. So at the same time, in strengthening institutions, you have to ward off corruption, and this can only be done if you have transparency in the process. And this will require so empowering the bureaucracy, which means that you need people who are able to really perform check and balances so that you can hold the public officials accountable, you can hold the public work officials accountable, and to ensure that the type of development that you are trying to implement will really benefit the public and the people. But of course, while there are problems in the Bangsamoro, we also have problems in the greater Philippine society. The Bangsamoro, however, can be seen as somewhat the experiment that we need to see if, say, a federal system of government can actually work in the country. If the Bangsamoro succeeds, for example, and this is a reply to your second question, if it succeeds in terms of empowering the people by means of local autonomy, then there is a sense, for instance, if the Philippines goes federal, because you have enough, human resources, you have enough capacities and competencies locally and in the regions in order to pursue a type of progress that is more equitable. But if the Bangsamoro fails, however, it would seem that it would be quite difficult to think of and ideally, uh, enable a system in the Philippines wherein you have a federal government, because it will mean that you will have the same type of failures insofar as what you lack in the Bangsamoro are things that you also lack in the other regions, like transparency and accountability on the level of public officials.
Thank you, sir. I think there are
Yes, yes,
already
sir.
questions in the chat box, but can I just make a short follow up,
Yes,
sir?
sir. Okay, sir.
Uh, because before, when I was still young, I was looking at the Bangsamoro or even the Muslim Mindanao in the whole perspective. Like, uh, they need help. There are less investment going to that region. That's why uh, they remain poor, something like that. Aside from election, sir, aside from election, and they choose the right leaders, what could be their other selling point? We know that the peace and order in Mindanao now is quite well peaceful if we compare it from the past years. But if they want to speak and let the national government listen to them, what could that be?
Well, obviously, basic security is important. So that's why it's called basic security, because without it, you cannot have stability in society. And unless you maintain that basic security, meaning the protection of people, lives, limbs, well-being, you cannot really pursue any type of progress. Okay, so because what business people want is, return of investment, and without profit, they will not be able to expand. Okay, so the types of investments that they have. But if you consider, for instance, Basilan, it is the biggest rubber plantation in the Philippines, and actually the third largest rubber plantation in the whole world. Okay, so they provide these raw materials for, say, Continental tires, which is the third largest in the world. And these are things that are present in the Bangsamoro resources wise. The problem, however, is that, of course, without basic security, development would stagnate in so far as whatever, progress you do, if there is a security threat, so bombing here, then everything comes to a stop. And it's important in that regard that you have a leader who is able to ensure the protection of the public, and the only way to do that, of course, is to strengthen the basic institutions within the region. Economy-wise, according to Amina Rasul, okay, so the Bangsang Moro, of course, is capable in terms of providing for their own. Okay, so, however, in various other aspects, say, for instance, in terms of infrastructure development, they are left behind because of the many centuries of exclusion and the injustices that they have suffered from. They actually, during the Commonwealth regime, simply became a source of votes for national politicians. And this is a result of the patronage system that was set in place, wherein they have been reduced into that. And so there's a lack of representation at the national level. There's also a lack of representation on the part of those in the margins at a local level. Even indigenous peoples in the Bangsang Moro, they also feel left behind, presumably because of the vested interest of those who are in positions of power. And right now, if the whole dynamics that we find in the Philippines, political dynasties, will continue to influence the system and the experiences of people in the Bangsang Moro, then you will not be able to realize the type of progress and development that we so desire for our Muslim brothers and sisters.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, we also have a question from John Oliver Ladaga in the audience asking, is this observation specific to Muslim Mindanao or is it possible to apply this lens to other regions?
Well, our study is specific to Muslim Mindanao. What I have been mentioning is only the background that you find in the Philippine society and politics.
Thank you, sir. We also have another question from Manalito Mansueto asking, do you feel that there are some aspects of the Bangsamoro culture which can be detrimental to the formation of the Bangsamoro, like, for instance, the traditional rido, which is a very violent practice? How can we mediate in the point of view of a non-Muslim and as an outsider of their community?
Well, I cannot answer that question because it's outside the scope of the study. I also don't want to make any guess. So we did not investigate such, and so we cannot provide any competent analysis in order to reply to such question.
Thank you so much, sir.
Sir, I have a question po. I
Okay.
just want to hear another side, different perspective. Well, justice is a fundamental concept in philosophy, especially in relevant discussions about poverty. So, from a philosophical standpoint, how can we define justice in the context of poverty? And what are the moral implications of addressing or ignoring structural inequalities?
Well, as regard to this paper, we look at it from the Rawlsian vantage point, so meaning it's about liberal justice, the fair redistribution of wealth, and on that note, there's the value of the basic structure of society, the role of institutions, the duty of citizens to empower those types of systems and mechanisms that will ensure that there is an equitable way of redistributing the resources of society. So, meaning to say, the type of justice that is institutional.
Okay, sir. Well, thank you so much.
We have another question from the chat box, sir, from Sajad Emma Malampay. They asked that, but for you, what are the specific strategies the BARM has to do to eradicate or somehow lessen the poverty and corruption?
Well, based on our well, there are many, of course. I'm sure there are many strategies, but specifically, what we're looking into here is how you firstly ensure that there's basic security the part of the people, and that is uh, ensuring that the political system is working so that it's not prone to the abuses of those who are in positions of power who control the economy. So what we're trying to say here is even if you have the system that you have right now, okay, these programs and these projects, if you have and continue to have a shadow or an underground economy, that would be detrimental to the growth in the region. So meaning the way we do this is to address first the predatory nature of the state, and until and unless they recognize that such predatory system exists, then you will not be able to really deliver to the people the things that they deserve as citizens of the republic.
Thank you so much, Doc. For the last questions, we have here Mr. Ivan.
Yes, please.
Good afternoon, sir. Regarding the data gathering process, sir, I'm curious and concerned, sir. Were there any challenges that you encountered during the FGDs, especially when discussing sensitive political issues? If so, po, how are you able
Mhm.
to manage them?
Yeah, it's difficult, really, especially when you need to talk to people who are into these troubled places. Halimbawa, gusto sana namin pumunta sa Tawi-Tawi, but our contact parang hindi niya ma-assure na pag magpunta kami doon, things will be coordinated well. So hindi na kami natuloy. So we settled for Zamboanga City. Meron naman akong contact doon. And he was able to bring into the discussion itong informants namin from Sulu, Basilan, Tawi-Tawi. Okay, so when we also went to Lake Cebu, for example, some of the participants were, quite uneasy kasi they find it hard also to share for fear they might be judged or labeled kasi they have this thinking since they belong to the indigenous communities, there's always the prejudice and bias against them. So, yeah, mahirap. And then there are also those who participated who were quite parang they were not comfortable because according to uh, this person, she's been into this her whole life. Okay? And as a religious person, so according to her, parang she's losing hope when it comes to ano yung pwedeng mangyari sa Bangsang Moro. So this sort of things, of course, we recorded them and put everything into context and well, God permit na natanggap naman yung papel despite all these inadequacies that we have experienced.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, I think that's it for our open forum. Thank you very much, Dr. Mabulok, for coming in and answering all our questions. And thank you to those who participated in our open forum. Let me present a certificate of appreciation to Dr. Christopher Ryan B. Mabulok for sharing his time and expertise as resource speaker during the SPJRD talks with the theme Social Cultural Realities held on April 24, 2025 via Zoom. Given this 24th day of April 2025, signed by President Bonifacio G. Gabales Jr. So before we end our uh, afternoon session, I would like to request everyone to open your camera and we'll have a brief photo opportunity. So everyone, in 3, 2, 1, smile. Next page. 3, 2, 1, smile. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much. To conclude our program officially, we'll hear the closing remarks from Dr. Randy A2D. Sir?
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Sir Ryan. The SPGRD talks or the series are designed to disseminate researches for wider audience, aside from, of course, the usual readability of these articles, as these are also freely available online. Moreover, the sharing of the authors also provide opportunities for them as authors and also the audience or other scholars and participants of the talks to interact and discuss further the findings and even implications of the studies or the published articles. Today, we are blessed to hear the wisdom of our three authors to this morning in the persons of Dr. Rongard Tongzapal and Dr. Hanafi Hassan. They talk about the research output in Cuyao and Damasi, Thailand regarding folklore, identity, and tourism. This afternoon, we listened to Dr. Ryan Mabolok talking about structural poverty in Muslim Mindanao. His talk was part of his co-authored article with Mussolini Lidasan, Monsor Limba, and Russell Imsalik, his friends or colleagues from ADU and also Notre Dame University. This rich sharing of scientific endeavors bring us to the reality of Cuyao province in Thailand and the Bangsamoro region in our country, the Philippines. With that, on behalf of our editor-in-chief, Sir Sajid Ingilan, our research director, Dr. Merlina Ruina, and our vice president for research, development, and extension, Dr. Roger Montepio, we would like to thank our authors and speakers this morning and this afternoon. And I would like also to congratulate the editorial board of SPGRD, led by Sir Ingilan, and the staff of SPGRD for achieving another milestone this year, and that is SPGRD attaining quartile 2, Q2 in Simago ranking, and also as the top journal in the Philippines for multidisciplinary area, and third in the Philippines for all areas, even if are still a very new journal, but this journal already achieved such a thing. And this achievement is a testament to the dedication of the editorial board and staff, their hard work, and of course, attention to standards. So to all participants who are joining or still present this afternoon, thank you for your participation, and we hope to see you in the next SPGRD talks, and waiting for your articles to be submitted in our journal. Good afternoon, and God bless everyone.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tudi. This concludes the first session of the SPGRD Talks for 2025. We would like to express our sincere gratitude to our esteemed speakers for sharing their research works, which significantly contributed to the body of knowledge. And I'd like to take my time to thank the following institutions: University of Southeastern Philippines, all campuses; Mindanao State University, Iligan Institute of Technology; Davao Doctors College, University of Mindanao, Bukidnon State University, Davao Oriental State University, University of the Philippines, Pangasinan State University, Tarlac State University, National University, National Teachers College, Lyceum of the Philippines University, Batangas, Rizal Technological University, West Visayas State University, Eastern Visayas State University, Sultan Kudarat State University, the Department of Education, and other participating universities, colleges, and institutions from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Thank you, everyone. This wouldn't have been successful without your attendance, participation, and support. I hope you have learned important insights from the presentation today that you may share with others. All right, at this point, we will be posting the link for the evaluation form. You will be given until 5 p.m. today to complete the form, and your e-certificates will be automatically generated and sent to your respective emails after submitting the form. Once again, thank you for being with us for the first session of SPGRD Talks. The next session will be on August 7, 2025 for a different discussion, topic, or research studies. Please follow our Facebook page, use our publication unit for updates. This has been Rian. See you again at the next one.
Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon.
Recording stopped.